Welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Veronica and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please check below to see if you've subscribed to our channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up on your feed more often. Humans really live on a Class 13 death world? Asked Lathara from her front row seat. Professor Yonner's gaze shifted to the source of the question. White-skinned Frizarian with elegantly pointed ears and flowing silver hair seated in the front row of the circular lecture hall. The student leaned forward, her naturally cold eyes wide with skepticism, hands gripping the edge of her console. This was the first multi-species class ever sanctioned by the Galactic Council, and moments like these reminded Yonner precisely why such educational initiatives were long overdue. As she considered her response, Yonner became momentarily self-conscious of the contrast between herself and the Frizarian student, most because of the fear about different cultural sensibilities. Professor Yonner was a lithe figure standing just over 6 feet tall. Her deep violet skin had a subtle smooth texture that reflected the light as she moved. Her dark blue hair seemed to defy gravity, cascading in thick strands down to her waist, while the glasses perched on her nose. Yonner's yellow eyes were large and almond-shaped, with round pupils that dilated dramatically in low light. As her small pointed ears peeked through her hair, she took a few steps toward Lathara. "Yes," Professor Yonner said, getting a glimpse of the group of furred students beside Lathara, and only then she explained. "They call it Earth, and for many reasons, it became the first Class 13 death world." One of the furred students, a male Kratsurian, whose label on the desk referred to as Xanon, asked, "Isn't Class 13 excessive, Professor? I know humans have a fearsome reputation. I've heard about their strength, but Class 13 is still too much." Professor Yonner turned to the Kratsurian student, her almond-shaped eyes studying him carefully. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she considered his question, remembering vividly the first time she had learned about Earth herself. The same disbelief, the same question mark that now lingered in Xanon's eyes, had once been in her own. The skepticism was natural. She had wrestled with it too. "There are opposing views about Earth's classification in the galactic scientific community," Yonner finally replied, her voice measured and thoughtful. "Many respected xenobiologists argue it should remain a Class 10 with exceptional notation, but others insist it belongs in a category of its own." She adjusted her glasses slightly before continuing. "I have been there in person, Xanon. I have breathed that air, drunk that water, and interacted with its creatures. To me, there is no doubt that Earth is indeed a Class 13 death world." The class erupted into not-so-subtle conversations. The varied furred species close to Xanon exchanged subtle whispers, their ears moving and eyes darting between their companions, while the reptilians and the avians in the back rows didn't bother lowering their voices. "Academically dishonest," hissed a reptilian with iridescent scales. "No sentience could survive those conditions," chirped an avian with brilliant red plumage. "A bureaucratic error, obviously," muttered a green gelatinous being sitting alone, away from the other groups. Among the chaos, Professor Yonner heard these comments of doubt, directly alluding to her lying. This was a great example of how they saw Earth, a place so hostile to life that it shouldn't exist. The mere suggestion that anyone could visit and return unharmed seemed preposterous to them. Professor Yonner suddenly became determined to make them understand that Earth was indeed as bad as they thought. Yet at the same time, it wasn't the hell they had in mind. It was a contradiction she'd struggled to articulate since her first expedition. With a decisive tap on her console that sent a subsonic pulse through the room, she reestablished order. The conversations halted abruptly, all eyes returning to her. "I overheard some comments," she said, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. "And I want to be absolutely clear. I am not lying. I have been to Earth. I have walked its surface, interacted with its inhabitants, and conducted extensive field research there. My observations are documented in the Galactic Scientific Archives under Verification Protocol 7 Epsilon. Professor Yonner was about to continue when Lathara spoke again, her voice cutting through the lingering murmurs. "If you've been to Earth," Lathara asked, leaning forward in her seat, "how were you able to return?" There was something strange in the young Frizarian's tone. Not skepticism now, but something more urgent, almost desperate. Yonner noticed the shift immediately. The student's naturally cold eyes held an intensity that hadn't been there before, and her fingers gripped the edge of her console so tightly that her knuckles had paled to a lighter shade of blue. Lathara added, "Our Empress is on Earth right now. We're worried she's not coming back alive." The revelation hung in the air. Suddenly, Yonner understood. This wasn't just academic curiosity for Lathara. The question about Earth's classification wasn't theoretical. It was personal. The young Frizarian wasn't challenging scientific consensus. She was searching for reassurance. Yonner's expression softened as she approached Lathara's desk. "As long as your Empress is with the humans, she won't die," Professor Yonner explained gently. "Humans are remarkably protective of visiting dignitaries. They understand their world's dangers better than anyone and have developed extensive protocols to keep off-worlders safe." Noticing the hint of concern still lingering in the student's posture, the slight tremor in her silver hair, the tension around her eyes, Yonner added, "I can give you a detailed explanation about Earth's classification if you want. Perhaps understanding why it earned its designation might ease your concerns about your Empress. It would also be good for everyone else," she continued, addressing the rest of the class who clearly held many misconceptions about Earth. Yonner noticed Lathara nodding, her silver hair catching the light as she moved. Taking this as a cue, the professor stepped back to the center of the lecture hall, ready to dive into a deeper explanation. "The classification number for Deathworlds," Professor Yonner began, adjusting her glasses, "comes from a sum of 3 different factors: climate, geological, and biological." She gestured to the wall behind her, where a display appeared showing these 3 categories. "Each factor can be rated from 1 to 4, with 4 representing extreme danger levels rarely found in habitable worlds." The display showed a calculation grid with numbers appearing under each category. Earth scores a 4 in each category, totaling 12 of the 13 points representing Earth's death world scale. Yonner deliberately didn't mention the last point. It was too soon for that. Her yellow eyes scanned the room, gauging the students' reactions as they absorbed this information, some of them already entering notes into their personal devices. "Professor," Zonner spoke up, his fur bristling slightly along his neck, "are you saying Earth scored a 4 in all 3 categories?" His voice carried both skepticism and awe. "It's hard to believe such a planet could exist, let alone support sentient life." Several students around him nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on the display showing the maximum danger ratings across all categories. "This is rather common opinion," Yonner replied with a knowing smile. "But it is true that such a planet exists. Take the climate category, for example." She gestured to the first column on the display. "Unlike most planets the Galactic Council has cataloged, Earth is the only one whose climate contains both extremes of hotness and coldness simultaneously. Some regions experience temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius, while others remain below -40. She expanded the display to show rotating Earth with temperature zones highlighted in contrasting colors. And many places have radical changes between what humans call seasons. A single location might experience scorching heat in one part of their year and be buried under ice in another. Some regions can see temperature fluctuations of 20 degrees within a single day. Most species would require completely different environmental adaptations just to survive the changing conditions of a single location. Lathara suddenly straightened in her seat, her white skin paling several shades. Our species can't survive hot climates, she said, her voice rising with anxiety. Those humans shouldn't keep our empress in there. Her trial and treaty negotiations were supposed to be on neutral ground. The class erupted into chaos again. Your empress declared war on humanity first, shouted a reptilian student from the back. What did she expect? The diplomatic archives clearly show the Fraserians fired on a human colony ship, added a multi-limbed student with metallic exoskeletons. Not very smart to provoke Deathworlders, is it? Sneered a huge avian, ruffling its feathers in apparent amusement. Across the lecture hall, ancient rivalries and political tensions that had simmered beneath the surface now boiled over. A Credarian student bared teeth at a Maraxian, while two previously friendly Zeltani students moved to opposite sides of the room. Professor Yonner slammed her hand down on the console, triggering not just a subsonic pulse, but also briefly dimming the lights. The sudden sensory shift silenced everyone. That's enough, she said, her voice low but carrying throughout the hall. Each of you agreed to leave politics outside when you signed up for this class. She surveyed the room with stern yellow eyes. Some of your species are technically at war with each other right now. Some have been enemies for generations. Bringing up politics is a recipe for disaster in a class like ours. She adjusted her glasses and straightened her posture. We will stick to Deathworld theory and xenoimmunology instead. The scientific facts. Not political opinions, not military history, not diplomatic grievances. She looked directly at Lathara. And if you have personal concerns about dignitaries, we can discuss those after class. Is that understood? The silence that followed was uneasy, but compliant. Professor Yonner noticed a profound sadness in Lathara's eyes. The Fraserian didn't reply, her silence more revealing than any words. Something about the student's quiet despair softened Yonner. With a sigh, the professor activated her wrist terminal, her violet fingers quickly searching for information about the Fraserian Empress, while the classroom whispers gradually died out. After a quick scan of the results, she looked up and delivered what she hoped was a non-political explanation. Lathara, Yonner said, her yellow eyes fixed on the white-skinned student. I won't comment on why the Fraserian Empress was found innocent by the humans and decided to exile herself to a place called Alaska on Earth instead of returning to her world. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But what I can explain, as part of our curriculum, is that Earth's climate, while chaotic, still has locations with limited temperature variations. There are deserts that stay mostly hot throughout the year, and cold regions that maintain their coldness across seasons. Moving closer to Lathara's desk, Yonner lowered her voice so only the student could hear. You have nothing to worry about regarding your Empress. As long as she's with the humans, they will take care of her. That's what they do to those who visit their planet. It's their way. Xanon, to Yonner's pleasant surprise, raised his hand and asked a non-controversial question. Professor, why does Earth get a score of 4 in the climate category if it has places where climate remains consistent across seasons? His earnest inquiry seemed to reset the tension in the room. Several other students leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Yonner returned to the center of the lecture space, grateful for the academic lifeline. An excellent question, Xanon. While Earth does have regions with relatively stable temperatures, what earns it a 4 in climate classifications are its extreme weather phenomena. She adjusted the display to show swirling cloud formations. Earth experiences what humans call hurricanes and typhoons, massive rotating storm systems with wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. These storms can destroy entire settlements and dramatically alter coastlines. She cycled through images of various weather events, towering funnel clouds, lightning storms, and blizzards that buried entire cities. Besides these wild storms, Earth's atmosphere is twice as dense as the galactic standard. The exaggerated oxygen alone would be toxic to approximately 60% of the Council species. She displayed a bar chart comparing atmospheric compositions. The combination of unstable weather patterns, extreme seasonal variations, and atmospheric compositions makes Earth a Class 4 Deathworld based on climate alone. Professor Yonner noticed silence settling over the class. The students seemed slightly taken aback by the images on the main display. Their earlier skepticism had given way to a stunned fascination as they stared at the visual evidence of Earth's meteorological extremes. "If climate is bad," called out a reptilian student from the back rows, his scales reflecting the light as he shifted position, "then how could the other categories also get a 4? His voice carried a challenging edge. "What's so bad about Earth's geology and biology that could rival such chaotic climate?" Despite the slightly aggressive tone, Yonner found herself enjoying the question. It was precisely the kind of scientific curiosity she had hoped to spark, even if delivered with a hint of defensiveness. Her lip curved into a small smile as she considered how best to answer, and how much of Earth's terrifying reality to reveal in one lecture. "I'll begin with Earth's geology," Yonner said, "and save biology for later, since that's a vaster and more complex subject." Using her wrist terminal, she projected another image to the main display, this one showing Earth's seismic activity, a web of glowing lines tracing fractures across the planet's crust. Unlike most habitable worlds, Earth's surface isn't a single stable shell. It's fragmented into what humans call tectonic plates that constantly move and grind against each other. She traced a finger along one particularly active boundary. These movements cause what they call earthquakes, sudden release of energy that can level entire cities in seconds. No warning, no time to evacuate, just destruction. The display shifted to show a mountain belching ash and molten rock into the air. There are volcanoes, ruptures in the planetary crust where magma from the planet's interior erupts onto the surface. The heat alone can kill instantly, but that's not the worst threat. Some eruptions release enough ash to block sunlight and drop global temperatures, causing widespread famine. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Yonner continued. "In the Earth's ancient past, these geological phenomena have caused extinction events that wiped out most life forms on the planet. And yes," she paused for emphasis, "such events could happen again at any moment. The humans are aware of this and still choose to live there." A furred student toward the middle of the lecture hall raised a clawed hand. His fur was mottled with patches of black and tan, and he wore what appeared to be a ceremonial sash across his chest. "Is this why Earth rates as a Category 4 world in the geological classification?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. "Standard classification will give these angry planets a 3 at most. Even Pyrovar, with its constant volcanic activity, only rates as a 3. Why is Earth a 4? The question was precise and well-informed, suggesting the student had significant background in the planetary classification systems. Several others nodded, clearly having wondered the same thing. "An excellent observation," Yonner said, nodding appreciatively at the well-informed student. "What pushes Earth from a 3 to a 4 in geological classification is its gravity." She adjusted the display to show comparative gravity measurements. Earth's gravity is 2.5 times galactic standard. It's relentless and inescapable. Her expression shifted slightly, becoming more personal. "When I first visited Earth, I could barely stand upright despite coming from a high-gravity world." Yonner's yellow eyes seemed to look past the classroom for a moment, lost in memory. It took me 17 days to adapt enough to walk without assistance. My bones ached constantly, my muscles strained with every movement. Even breathing required conscious effort. She gestured to her lithe frame, and I'm considered physically robust by my species standards. She returned her attention to the classroom, noting the surprised expressions on several faces. The humans don't just survive in this crushing gravity. They like living there. Their muscles and skeletal systems develop under this constant pressure. It's why they appear so compact and dense compared to most galactic species. Professor Yonner felt a sense of satisfaction. She had already explained more than half of what made Earth a Class 13 Deathworld, and the students were finally beginning to understand the true nature of this exceptional planet. Her moment of professional pride was interrupted when Lathara spoke again. "Earth does sound scary," the Fraserian admitted, her cold eyes now wide with genuine concern. "But what kind of monsters lived there for the biological category to also rank a 4? The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of every student. Even those who have been surreptitiously checking their personal devices looked up, awaiting Yonner's response. The class had moved beyond skepticism now, replaced by collective fascination with a seemingly impossible world. Professor Yonner looked around, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. The question about Earth's biological threats had struck a personal chord. "Let me tell you about my first days on Earth," she began, her tone shifting from academic to conversational. "I arrived as part of a 12-member xenobiological research team. Our ship landed at a facility, a quarantine station in a region humans named Australia, which I would later learn contains some of the most lethal creatures on an already lethal planet." She activated the display, showing a sterile white room. "Our first 3 days were spent in complete isolation. The humans took extraordinary precautions before allowing us any contact with their world. They explained that their own scientists moving between biomes follow similar protocols, not to protect themselves, but to protect their ecosystems from cross-contamination." Yana resumed her pacing, her yellow eyes distant with memory. "I learned the hard way that most Earth's insects are poisonous to non-Earth evolved creatures. On my 4th day, during my first supervised outdoor excursion, a tiny flying insect called a mosquito managed to penetrate my environmental suit at the wrist seal." She absently rubbed a spot on her violet skin. "It was barely visible to the naked eye, a flying bloodsucker about this size." She held up her thumb and forefinger barely a millimeter apart. "Largely harmless to humans, though annoying. But to me, the mosquito injected an anticoagulant before feeding, and my body had no evolutionary defenses against it." Her expression darkened. "Within minutes, my arm swelled to twice its normal size. Within an hour, I was feeling sick. The human medical team had to supervise me for hours while they filtered my blood and administered counteractants." The green gelatinous student shifted uncomfortably in its containment suit. "And trust me, there are mosquitoes everywhere on Earth. 3 other members of our research team had to be evacuated after similar exposures. Their symptoms were different for each species. One developed lesions across her exoskeleton. Another's respiratory system began to shut down. The third experienced temporary blindness." Xanon raised a furred hand. "Just from one insect species?" "That's just it," Yana replied. "Earth has over 1 million documented insect species. Over 10,000 of them feed on blood or other bodily fluids." She cycled through images of various insects. Beetles with massive pincers, wasps with stingers longer than their bodies, clusters of ants devouring larger prey. There are bees and wasps that live in social colonies numbering in the thousands. They communicate through chemical signals to coordinate attacks and can inject venom through stingers. Some can sting multiple times. Others leave their stinger in your flesh, pumping venom until you remove it. Yonner adjusted her glasses. Then there are ticks, tiny arachnids that attach to your skin, burrow their heads inside, and can remain feeding for days. They carry diseases that can cause lifelong debilitation, even for humans with their robust immune systems. Our research team discovered that some Earth parasites view non-Earth biology as ideal hosting grounds, lacking the defenses that Earth-evolved creatures have developed. The avian student with red plumage clicked his beak. These sound scary, but not Category 4 threats if you remain in your spacesuit. You would think so, Yonner nodded. That was my assumption as well. But by the second week, when the humans began introducing us to their unusual life forms, I realized how limited my understanding had been. She brought up a new image on the display, a brownish serpentine creature. This is what humans call an electric eel, though it's not actually an eel by their taxonomic standards. It's one of the most unusual life forms I've encountered in my career. She enhanced the image, showing an internal diagram. The electric eel devotes nearly 80% of its body length to specialized organs that generate electricity. Think about that. The majority of its physiology isn't dedicated to digestion, reproduction, or locomotion, but to producing an electrical charge. Several students leaned forward, clearly intrigued. These creatures can generate up to 860 volts of electricity, enough to stun or kill most predators in their vicinity. They use this ability not just for defense, but for hunting and navigation. The student with the metallic exoskeleton raised an appendage. How does it not electrocute itself? Excellent question, Yonner brightened. Its internal tissues include natural insulation. But what fascinates me most was learning that the electric eel can control the voltage of its discharge with remarkable precision. It can emit a series of low-voltage pulses to locate prey through electrolocation, then deliver a high-voltage shock to immobilize it. She closed the image. When our team was allowed to observe one in a controlled setting, I made the mistake of touching the water with a conductive instrument. The resulting shock overloaded my translator implant and left my arm numb for a moment. And remember, this was under controlled conditions, with human scientists who understood the risks of supervising. Yonner paused, looking around the room. The students were rapt, their earlier skepticism completely erased. After our aquatic introduction, the humans took us to what they call a wildlife sanctuary to observe some of their larger fauna. This is where I first comprehended why Earth's biological hazards earn their Category 4 classification. The display showed a massive feline with a golden mane. This is a lion, an apex predator from regions humans call savannas. They hunt in coordinated groups that can accelerate to stunning speeds over short distances and possess both claws and canine teeth that can penetrate most standard protective gear. Your spec suits wouldn't protect you against that. She cycled through several other images rapidly. These are bears and can weigh over 700 kilograms and have been observed tearing through reinforced metal containers. These crocodiles can remain motionless for hours before striking with enough force to drag a prey twice their size underwater. These hyenas have jaws strong enough to crush bones. Lathara's white skin had paled considerably, and humans survive among these creatures. Not only survive, some humans deliberately seek them out for what they call wildlife photography or safari expeditions. Yonner shook her head slightly. What other species would kill for safety they enjoy as entertainment? She brought up a new image, a hooded serpent in a striking pose. This is a spitting cobra, not content merely to inject venom through fangs like other snakes. This species can project its venom through the air with remarkable accuracy, targeting the eyes of threats up to 3 meters away. The venom can cause intense pain and can lead to blindness. A reptilian student who had been skeptical earlier now leaned forward, expression unreadable. And it's not just the obvious predators, Yonner continued. Even Earth's herbivores are dangerous. They've evolved in this high-gravity environment alongside predators, resulting in creatures of immense power and often unpredictable temperament. She displayed images of a massive gray beast with a horn on its snout, followed by a striped equine creature that looked deceptively gentle. This rhinoceros can charge at speeds that seem impossible for its bulk and gore predators with its horn. And this seemingly docile zebra has a kick powerful enough to shatter a predator's skull. Even the gentle-appearing hippopotamus kills more humans annually than any other large mammal. She paused, collecting her thoughts. By the 3rd week of my field study, I thought I understood Earth's dangers. I was wrong. I accompanied a human botanist to collect samples in a wetland area. She pointed out a small innocuous-looking plant with white flowers. The display showed the delicate plant. "Don't touch that," she warned me. "It's water hemlock, one of our most poisonous plants." She explained that ingesting even a small amount causes seizures and death within hours. I was careful to avoid it, but during our survey, I brushed against another plant she hadn't warned me about. Yonner's voice grew quieter. 20 minutes later, I was convulsing as my nervous system began shutting down. The humans rushed me to their medical facility and administered an antidote. When I recovered, they explained that Earth has thousands of toxic plant species, many of which could harm through mere skin contact, and the severity of the threat for non-humans can only be learned after the fact. She displayed an image of an intricate plant structure with hinged leaves. Some Earth plants are carnivorous. They've evolved mechanisms to trap and digest insects and small animals. The Venus flytrap uses trigger hairs to detect prey, then snaps shut in less than a second. The display shifted to show a pitcher-shaped plant. Others, like this pitcher plant, produce slippery surfaces and digestive enzymes to trap and dissolve creatures that fall inside. While most are too small to threaten larger organisms, some species can entrap creatures the size of small mammals. A student with bird-like features asked, "If the plants are dangerous too, what do humans eat?" "They've spent millennia selectively breeding certain plants to be safe for consumption," Yonner explained. "But even their food can be hazardous. What they call chilies contain a chemical that creates a burning sensation when consumed, a defense mechanism the plant evolved to discourage mammals from eating its fruits. Humans, inexplicably, cultivate varieties specifically to maximize this painful compound and add it to their food deliberately." Several students exchanged glances of disbelief. "And then there are parasites," she continued. "Earth's ecosystems have produced specialists in invading and hijacking other organisms at every level. There are fungi that can turn insects into zombies, controlling their bodies to spread spores. There are microscopic organisms in the soil that can burrow through protective gear." She brought up a series of increasingly disturbing images. "Some parasites can live inside your eyes. Others can enter through your ears while you sleep. Some can penetrate the skin and migrate through the body to the brain or other organs." A collective shudder passed through the class. "Even humans sometimes end up with these parasites in their brains when they're careless. Fortunately for them, they're not a death sentence because of their advanced medical science specializes in addressing these common threats." Lathara, her white skin now notably paler, raised a tentative hand. "Professor, with all these dangers, do they have any friendly creatures?" Yonner's expression softened. They do. Remarkably, some of the Earth's most potentially dangerous species have formed symbiotic relationships with the humans. She displayed an image of a human child embracing a large, furry quadruped with sharp teeth. This is called a dog, descended from pack-hunting predators called wolves, yet selectively bred by humans over thousands of years to become companions. Strangely, they're among the friendliest animals in the galaxy when you consider specific breeds. They're loyal, emotionally intelligent, and form deep bonds with humans. She smiled slightly. During my recovery from the plant poisoning, the medical facility had what they called a therapy dog, an animal specifically trained to provide comfort to the sick or injured. Despite my alien biochemistry and appearance, this creature showed that I can only describe as genuine concern for my well-being. Xanon looked skeptical. But surely all this doesn't warrant a Category 4 rating. Many worlds have dangerous wildlife. Yonner walked back to her desk and leaned against it, crossing her arms. In my personal opinion, ranking Earth a 4 in the biological category is too little, she said firmly. The sheer diversity of ways Earth life can kill you is unparalleled. It's not just that dangerous creatures exist. It's that they're everywhere, in every ecosystem, at every scale, from microscopic to massive. She removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. When you consider that humans evolved alongside all these threats and developed immunities and behaviors to counter them, well, it explains a great deal about human behavior, doesn't it? They don't just survive on their death world, they categorize its dangers, study them, and sometimes even keep the deadliest specimens as pets. She replaced her glasses, looking around at her students. Lithara raised her hand slowly, her silver hair catching the light. Professor, I've been tallying the numbers as you explained. 4 points for climate, 4 for geological factors, and 4 for biological threats. That's only 12 points total. She's right, Xanon added, leaning forward with newfound interest. You mentioned earlier that Earth scored 13 points on the Death World scale. What's the 13th point for? The two students, who had begun the class on opposite sides of an interstellar conflict, were now united in their curiosity, their earlier tensions temporarily forgotten in pursuit of knowledge. Yonner smiled, pleased they had been paying enough attention to notice this discrepancy. She had deliberately withheld this information, saving it for last. Now the class was finally ready to understand the most controversial aspect of Earth's classification. The 13th point, Professor Yonner said, lowering her voice slightly, comes from the humans themselves. A murmur ran through the class. Unlike most sentient species who evolved to cooperate in the face of planetary threats, humans developed along a different evolutionary path. They became apex predators of apex predators. They don't just survive their world's dangers, they conquered them. She activated a final display sequence showing human history in rapid progression. Humans have been at war with each other for most of their recorded history. They developed increasingly efficient ways to kill not just Earth's dangerous fauna, but also each other. While most species channel aggression into ritual or limited conflict, humans perfected the art of total warfare. The display showed ancient battles, then modern warfare, then weapons of mass destruction. 200 years ago, the Galactic Council first discovered Earth, but kept it under observation rather than making contact. They witnessed humans harness the power of the atom, not first for energy, but for weapons. They split the atom to create devices that could level entire cities in seconds. Several students gasped. The council debated for decades how to classify such a planet. The traditional scale only went to 12, But some xenobiologists argue that a species with both the capacity and willingness to destroy their own kind on such scales represented an unprecedented threat category. Yonner paused, looking directly at Lathara. This is partly why your Empress's conflict with humanity caused such concerns throughout the galaxy. Humans don't just survive on a death world, they are themselves an extension of its dangers. The 13th point acknowledges that any species that evolves on Earth inherits not just physiological adaptation, but psychological ones that make them uniquely dangerous. The green gelatinous student, who had been silent for most of the class, spoke up. Are you saying humans are inherently violent? That seems like an oversimplification. An excellent observation, Yonner nodded. And you're right. The 13th classification point generated the most debate among xenobiologists. Some, like myself, argued against it on the grounds that humans have also demonstrated remarkable capacity for cooperation, empathy, and self-restraint. She deactivated the display. But in the end, the classification stood. Earth became the first and only Class 13 death world, not just because of its climate, geology, and biology, but because it produced a sentient species capable of both surviving all those threats and becoming an even greater threat themselves. Xandon frowned. That seems unfair to the humans. Perhaps, Yonner conceded. But consider this. Humans are the only known species that, upon discovering nuclear fission, immediately used it to create weapons that could destroy their entire civilization. They're also the only species that, having seen the devastation such weapons cause, chose not to use them again despite engaging in numerous subsequent conflicts. She looked around the room. Earth is a Class 13 death world because it is the crucible that forged humanity, a species of contradictions. They are capable of both tremendous violence and extraordinary compassion. They survived a planet trying to kill them at every turn and emerged not just alive, but dominant. They wage war and create art. They build weapons and hospitals with equal dedication. As the class time indicator flashed, signaling the end of the lecture, Yonner offered her conclusion. In my years of studying humans, I've come to believe that their most remarkable trait isn't their capacity for violence, but their ability to choose peace despite evolving in an environment that rewards aggression. Perhaps that's the true lesson of Earth's classification. Not that humans are dangerous, but that they constantly struggle against their nature and often succeed. She smiled at her students, particularly at Lathara. Remember that when you think about your Empress on Earth, she isn't just surrounded by the dangers of a Class 13 death world. She's protected by the very species that gives it that classification. And that, paradoxically, might make her safer than anywhere else in the galaxy. As the students gathered their belongings and began to file out, Professor Yonner couldn't help but feel satisfied. They had begun the class divided by politics and skeptical of Earth's classification. They left unified in their fascination with humanity's home world and the remarkable species it had produced. Class 13 Death World indeed, she thought, and yet somehow, against all logic, also home.